Hello everyone, I'm Casper. Welcome to Testimony, where we help QA engineers become test automation engineers one slice at a time. And today we are going to talk about an important topic that you surely are going to come across after you land your new job, after you are on the new position and you are eager to work. You can't just wait to dive into test automation. So imagine a scenario like that. You are starting out at your new position. You have been, for example, assigned some regression test case, let's say, for the sake of this presentation, and you are to automate it. And so your first instinct may be to just dive right in, to get your feet wet as soon as possible. And of course, I understand that. I understand the eagerness to finally try and automate something. But actually diving into code immediately after you're assigned a task is setting yourself up for a lot of needless headache. And today we are going to explore what you should take care of beforehand in order to mitigate the risk of this needless headache. And so let's go for this journey. This will be in no particular order. They are all pretty important. So I urge you to just follow me along through this ride. And so let's dive right in. So first of all, it is that you should know your application. This is very important in all branches, in all departments, of course, but since we are taking laser focus on test automation, on being a test automation engineer here, it is of absolutely crucial importance to know your application as a test automation engineer. And of course, this will also come in time, because the more you spend with the application, the more you test, the more you explore, the more you know. But you can facilitate this whole endeavor through, for example, doing exploratory testing. So you can not just wait until you are familiar with the application, because this will come in time. So you shouldn't be stressed about just doing anything in order to learn the application as if it was some kind of a textbook. I'm not urging you to do that. What I am urging you to do is just to try and see the application through the lens of an end user. Just go to the application and click around. Imagine you are a user trying to do something. Imagine you are performing an end-to-end test by the user. So just trying to use the application to follow a flow, to imagine some kind of a use case that the user may have in mind and try to follow it. Try and just click around, try to see what happens. Try to do, like I said, exploratory testing, trying to break stuff, trying to do things that you know shouldn't be done, but the user may want to do. This all will result in you knowing more about the application, because you are not only seeing it through the eyes of an employee, you are seeing it through the eyes of an actual end user. And then we get to number 2, which is to follow the test case manually. I cannot stress this enough. I've seen tons of people just diving right into the code without trying to even go through the steps of a test case manually first. I want you to remember, just because you are doing test automation does not mean that manual testing is in any way, shape, or form beneath you. It's not something that is superior and inferior. These are just things that are different tools within your tool belt, and you should try and use them like that. And so you are doing yourself a disservice if you are just ignoring one of these. And like I also said in the video about whether we should automate everything, manual testing has its place, so you are going to use it in like one way or another. So you shouldn't just try and jump to test automation by ignoring manual testing. You are just adding something on top of that stack. And the natural consequence of that is that when you are assigned a test case to automate, or if you create a test case to automate, regardless, if you have a test case that is in written form, and each of your test cases which are automated should be in written form first, even if you are responsible for testing it, you should still put that down and have it written somewhere before you start automating, because this is like the basic plan of which you are going to be basing your script upon. And so you should go through the script manually just clicking around and doing stuff and seeing how it all goes. And if something is not clear, you should do it multiple times. This is not something that is forbidden. This is not something that is showing that you are not a good test automation engineer. Being a good test automation engineer is being holistic in all of this. It's not trying to eyeball everything and trying to write something from your memory. You will get down to writing, but first you should write it down. And if you write it down, you should go through the manual test as if you were just testing manually. And once you do, you should make note of all the aberrations that are happening, of all the problems, or all of the potential obstacles, so that when you get to actually coding stuff, you are focusing on coding and not going back and forth between your code and the manual test case in written form just because you don't know how something works, or you did not foresee something, or you don't know what to do, or you haven't seen some problems, obstacles, roadblocks, blockers coming. You can mitigate that risk, and you should do it in order to actually facilitate your coding of the test case script in the end. Very often, not having done the test manually results in you not knowing what the test case actually is about. And you need to zero in on the essence of the test case. You need to have it ingrained within you before you start coding, so that it is a smooth process, so that it's elegant, and so that you focus on important stuff, which is translating the essence of the test case into code once writing the code. Not trying to figure out what the test does in the first place, because if you don't know that, how can you expect to translate it into something a machine can understand if even you don't understand it at the moment of creation? Number 3 is understanding the tech stack. This will be, of course, unique to each and every project organization. You will see some similarities after you are deeper into the field, after you have done a couple of projects, after you have a couple of organizations under your belt. But even then, you should always be mindful of the tech stack. And that's because it can help, it can not interfere. And very often, not interfering is enough of a help that the tech stack can do for you. But it can also interfere. And so you should be mindful of all the areas that it can interfere. You should be mindful of when the environment is laggy or buggy, or when something has the proclivity to not work, to not load up properly. Maybe your backend has the tendency to lag in certain situations. Maybe your front end, for example, has the proclivity to not load something up properly, or sometimes to not load elements the way that it should. Or maybe the environment is laggy, or it is sluggish, or sometimes it gets these slowness bursts, who knows why. There are a ton of things that may happen, and the more interconnections you have within your project, and the more dependencies you have, the more things can happen. And so you should be ready for all of this, because we are not living in an ideal world where the whole tech stack is set up in a way that will facilitate every process. And so you should be ready for the messiness, for the chaos, and for the uncertainty. I always stress the uncertainty because it is something that you are going to be working with constantly. Regardless of how well structured the project is, you may have less uncertainty, or you may have uncertainty in different areas, but still you are going to be working with uncertainty. And knowing your tech stack is one of the best ways to actually tame that uncertainty. Because if you know your tech stack, if you know the various elements and layers of the application, and of course you will also learn that with experience, so don't feel pressured to immediately know everything right from the get-go. You also see as you go, but once again, be mindful. What I am urging you to do in this whole video, is telling you to be mindful, to take note, even a mental one, of things that may not work in your favor. And tech stack certainly is one of such things. You may need to be ready to have your tests aligned with different layers of the application in some weird way, shapes, or forms. You may, for example, need to have specific configuration for a given environment, or You may need to take into account that sometimes you may use a sleep instead of some elegant weight because something is structured in such a way, for example, in the backend that the fastest, the best way is just to do it like that rather than implement some elaborate system that will take more to maintain that actually provide to your framework. Knowing the tech stack just helps you know how to structure your code, how to structure your framework, and how to structure the smallest unit of this framework, which is your test case. Of course, we'll have a separate video about how to structure a test case because this is for a longer discussion, but you should note all the problems that may arise in order to be ready for all these things. Number 4 is to know your framework. I cannot stress this enough. First of all, I also recommend our video on what exactly is a framework if you need to understand that. If right now you are thinking, Casper, are you telling me that I should improve Playwright or that I should improve Robot Framework or I should improve Cypress, like its essence? I'm not talking about that. So you may want to go give this video a watch if you are not yet familiar with the duality of meanings of the word framework. I am now addressing framework, which is the whole collection of data inside your project using probably some other tool, also called a framework like a Playwright or something like that. But I am talking for simplicity's sake about your tests, resources, and stuff like that. So you should know your framework. And it goes without saying that you should also know the tools. But what I mean here is that you should know what exactly is included within your framework. What are the test cases? What are the resource files? What are the keywords that are currently working and are implemented already? What are the helper functions that someone has already coded up? And I cannot stress this enough because I cannot count the number of times I have seen people creating the same functionality over and over and over again. It is absolutely baffling how often people spend a whole day or a couple of days creating some elaborate resource file, for example, so that they have a functionality implemented, like a helper function for like logging in and doing something, where it is right there. It is included within the framework already. It has been used in some other test cases, some other people. I very often see the same keywords duplicated or cloned like 5 times because various people came at various points in the past, and instead of finding the previous resource file that already had the functionality that they wanted, they decided to just do it anew. So they create a new keyword or function or whatever a given tool for automation operates on, but still there is already this functionality and people don't use it. Just don't assume that something you are working on is absolutely unique and there has never been anyone within the history of the organization that had ever worked on that functionality. In 95% of the situation, this is not going to be true. Even if you are building a test case for some new functionality, it is still going to be heavily reliant on functionalities that came before. At least some of the building blocks will be there, I guarantee you. So just spend a short time looking around. If you have someone to ask, you may ask around. You may use your trusty Control-Shift-F and just go through the project and try some keywords that may be connected with that, because it is absolutely baffling how often people scratch their head for days trying to implement a functionality that is already there and that they could have just reused, maybe with some very slight tweak or with a slight variation or just doing a little bit of a refactor. But regardless of that, each of these situations would have been tens of times faster than just trying to write that anew. It's ubiquitous for people to do that, and it obfuscates the view for everyone. It makes your work harder. It makes the code more dirty. It makes the whole process less streamlined, and down the line, both you and other people will come to the project or work again on one of the functionalities, and they won't even know, even if they decide to look for whether someone had already done that in the past so that they could reuse it, they wouldn't even know which function to use, because there will be like 5 functions, and one will be called like click drop down, the other one will be select from drop down, the next one will be expand the drop down and select item, and all of them will be doing the same thing. One of them will be outdated because someone did them in the past and nobody cared to maintain it afterwards. Some of them will be the exact duplicate, just with some slight tweak or variation, and it will be a complete mess and a horror to maintain. So please look around. Best case scenario, someone more experienced than you will catch you trying to reinvent the wheel during the PR process. But you shouldn't you shouldn't rely on that. You shouldn't try and use your peer reviews as a kind of a kill switch that will just tell you if you reinvented the wheel, because you would have already spent that time on that thing by then. So just don't do that. Just for your own sake, for your organization's sake, for your colleagues' sake, look around and try to see if someone hadn't already provided that functionality in the past. And last but certainly not the least is to plan out the code. So you are effectively adding a new functionality to the framework. And so, as with every new functionality, you should plan it out first. You shouldn't just get to code and start writing. Even after doing all the things that I already mentioned, you should still have a moment to sit down with yourself and think this through. Will you need some special resources? Will you need some libraries? Will you have some dependencies? Will you need to create something specific for this test case? Or if you need to reuse something else, will you need to refactor this beforehand? Do you know what exactly the test should do, both from the perspective of you having done the test case manually already, and from knowing the limitations of the machine? I really recommend the video about the one mindset shift that you should make as a test automation engineer in order to be more familiar with how the machine isn't really something that you are telling the test case to as if it was another human being, but rather an alien. And so you should treat it like an alien. So you should think about all of these things before you get to coding. You don't need, of course, to come up with a full documentation unless your organization requires it, but you should still have a plan ready. Like a skeleton, what exactly is it going to do? How is it going to handle the data? Even on a high abstraction level. Do you have all the needed locators? If you don't, where are they going to be stored? Do you have all the helper functions that are going to click around and do stuff, not only the associations that you are going to write? So do you have those helper functions or keywords? If you do, where are they? If you don't, where are you going to place them? And if your immediate answer is, I'm going to throw everything inside this new thing I am creating, and I'm going to just create a giant spaghetti ball of code, you may want to reconsider. I really recommend the video I have on the channel, which is called What is the Page Object Model? If you want to know why the separation between your assertions and your helper functions is important, then I really recommend you go give that a watch, so that you don't throw everything into one place and then just be forever damned for it. So if you need to create new stuff, how will that be structured? How will those resource things be placed within the context of the framework? Where are you going to add them? How the code inside of them is going to be structured. So it can be very high concept. You don't need to be, like I said, too granular with that. You just need to get a good bird's eye view over these things, so that once you actually start coding, you are not stopping every 5 minutes because you need to refactor something, or you need to think through it then, when you are caught off guard and you need to suddenly stop your work altogether and start thinking about where to place something, and you already have a bunch of code, so you need to refactor that, and it becomes this never-ending dance of refactoring stuff you have just written because you haven't thought things through beforehand. So in order to not have that, plan your stuff before you start coding. And after doing all of that, you can be certain that you have done everything you could, everything that is within your might to actually be able to work with the code itself in the best way. And of course, it's still going to be a bumpy road, especially in the beginning, but you are still in a far better position that you would have been if you had just started writing code from the get-go. And once again, I am not trying to scare you. Actually talking about these things is more than these things will ever take for you. I was just trying to discuss it in order to give you a full explanation why that is important. But the more you do that, the more this will become a second nature to you, and you won't need to think about it. You won't need to analyze it. You won't need to constantly do a mental checklist of all these things. I am telling you about all of this so that you can make a mental note once you stumble upon them, and so then you are ready. And like I said, the more you do this and the more subconsciously you learn about the project and all the things around it, if you are focused, this will be a second nature to you. So I'm just telling you all of this because the sooner you start making note of all of these things, the sooner it will be easier to you to actually work within the project and to create good, high quality test cases and to make your own life easier. So don't fret, it will come naturally to you, both with time and with experience within the project, within the field, and the more you'll do it, the easier it'll get. So thank you for your attention. After doing that, you are ready to actually dive into the code, and we are going to have a separate episode on how to write a good test case, where we're going to focus exactly on how to structure it, what to think about during the actual coding phase, and how can you make that bumpy road as smooth as possible. Thank you very much. Please remember to like and subscribe, to visit our social media, both on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you for your attention, and as always, keep on rocking.